Hello and welcome to another episode of Fintech Focus TV with me, Toby. Today, absolutely delighted to be joined by the founder of ClauseMatch. It's Evgeny Likhoded. Evgeny, how are you?
Hi, Toby. I'm doing great, thank you.
Listen, lovely to speak to you, and thanks so much for coming on the show. Congratulations. ClauseMatch has been announced as one of the most influential fintechs in the Financial Technologist magazine. You're in great company in that mag. And it's great to hear about some companies who've absolutely defied the odds over the course of the last year. I think this is a very special magazine. This is the fourth time we've done this magazine and listed some of the most influential fintechs in the marketplace. This year in particular, I think with the challenges that have been out there and the rapid state of innovation, we've extended it to a bigger list than we've ever had before. We've had companies like EY and Baringa and Lloyd's all sort of adding their two pennies worth into who should be the companies to really look out for. And I'm delighted to say that you guys have been included on that list. Before we go into the story of the last 12 months and hear a little bit about the market and what you guys are doing and how you've helped customers and the challenges out there and everything in between, can you give us a little bit about your background and the company itself?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you, Toby. And obviously, we're incredibly grateful to be part of that list.
Pleasure.
Where do I start? Well, I'm the founder of ClauseMatch. My previous life before ClauseMatch was in legal and compliance. I was at Morgan Stanley and before that in the energy industry. Since 2008, I saw that the world is changing following the financial crisis, and especially from the regulatory perspective. The regulatory tsunami of new rules from regulators in financial services meant that compliance has started to change very quickly. While before compliance was an afterthought, today compliance, chief compliance officers sit on a board and they take up 10-20% of operating budget. But the tools have not evolved, so that's exactly what ClauseMatch was created to do, is to help compliance and risk professionals to work on compliance documentation in a centralized way, and then being able to communicate compliance documents to employees, which are always up to date, which are always the approved versions, and always follow the regulations.
I think reading up about your story beforehand, one of the things that really interested me, and I think this is one of the focal parts of founders in this space, is that you recognized an issue that was causing problems for you in your job, your day job, and thought, right, rather than moan about it, there's an opportunity here, and built a company around it, which is something I always like to see and resonate with within that. As a company now that's what 8 years old, 9 years old, I think it is since you launched, isn't it?
Yeah.
You've seen that sort of problem evolve. We've seen compliance as an industry and regtech as an industry, I guess, evolve considerably over even the last 5 years. I would suggest, and then we've had this sort of cataclysmic event that's happened in the marketplace that for some people has created problems, for other people it's created opportunities, and there's people there who've been impacted negatively from what we've seen over the last 12 months. And we've seen other companies who've been able to sort of really move further forward. Some of the the growth that you've experienced last year is astronomical. I mean, 130% growth over something as seismic as we've seen recently has been a monumental effort, and no wonder you listed and been nominated for listing within this because of it. But to look at that and say, I think that the intelligent companies have been able to look at this and say, right, how do we make it a positive from this situation? How do we increase efficiency? How do we look at everything? Tell me a little bit about your journey over the last 12 months and how the business has sort of adapted to that, and how you've managed to achieve growth numbers of that sort of significance over a very difficult period for so many.
Yeah, well, last 12 months have been challenging, and I think for everyone, even for successful companies who made through that year and came out being more successful, because I think with growth come different challenges. Last year when the pandemic started, we obviously had our own challenges, going fully remote, trying to understand, well, how do we now get in front of potential customers, because suddenly there are no conferences. Everything is remote, fully digital. So just, from the internal perspective, very quickly we switched to digital only and to digital content that would bring value to our customers and potential customers. So we started doing almost bi-weekly webinars, and not on our product, but more on the issues that companies are facing, especially, in difficult times, in compliance. We kind of were helped a little bit by regulators, because regulators have been looking into issues in compliance and how compliance will work going forward, where a lot of employees are working from home, and there is less oversight, and it's a lot more difficult to enforce compliance in organizations. So there was a guidance issued by Department of Justice in the US, which looks specifically at compliance programs, and looked at how companies need to address their compliance. That compliance programs need to be dynamic, policies and procedures need to be reviewed on a regular basis, they need to be communicated to employees, and the record of review, approval, and communication needs to be stored somewhere in an audit trail. So in fact, a lot of companies cannot comply with that today, because if I ask you, do you know what's your, travel policy?
I'll be writing it quite quickly, if I'm honest.
There you go. But imagine not a small company, but a huge company with tens of thousands or over 100,000 employees.
Yeah. Where
there are thousands of policy documents, and there is no control over who can write them, who can update them, who needs to approve them, and are they being read by employees, and are the employees reading the latest version? This is a very basic part of the organization of the business, but that part is never run properly.
Yeah.
So we have been evangelizing a lot in terms of how to streamline and improve the policy management process, because that ultimately brings the culture of compliance, the culture of doing the right thing, and actually showing to the regulators that yes, we are managing the organization properly.
So I think there's a very interesting aspect that you've spoken about there, moving it back slightly to everyone's paralysis, where the trade show suddenly started getting called off, and then the ability to meet your customers face to face started getting called off, and there was a mass stampede towards the digital opportunities, webinars, etc., and you obviously went in there and I think Abs did exactly the right thing, which was to say, right, how can we add value and help our customers through this sort of journey, which I would imagine gave you the touch points to then be able to to move them into upselling opportunities or new business opportunities. When you've grown revenue by over 130% through doing that, you've obviously done something right within that sort of remit, and it's worked well for you. Tell me a little bit about how you've managed to avoid the sort of webinar fatigue that people have spoken about, how you've managed to maintain engagement in that. And I'm also very interested to hear if that revenue is increasing your share of wallet with your current customers, or whether that's been new business orientated as well, and what some of the secrets that you've sort of learned and gleaned over this sort of year would be.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I start from just webinar fatigue, I guess the way we try to avoid that is to actually bring industry experts to the webinars, and to have the topics talking around what people are experiencing today. So, for example, how do you run compliance process in a remote world? And then we brought in the world's top analysts to run that webinar. So, of course, there were hundreds of people who wanted to join to actually listen. But then also, it wasn't just around remote and pandemic, because I think at some point everyone got tired of remote and pandemic work. And
there's only so many surveys about what's the optimum days at work, isn't there?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So at some point, driving a little bit more positive message as well.
Yeah,
rather than, everything is a problem and
very much so.
we can help you solve it. But I think I'm all around positivity as well, because out of any situation, something positive can come through.
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's so important to be seen, and never more so than now, because I think, whilst it's been a difficult period for everyone, and you only need to turn on the press for your daily dosage of bad news. So where there's positivity and opportunity coming out of it, I think that's a really important message to share. What about that blend of business and how you've won new business during this sort of time?
Yeah, so talking about new business, we actually have seen a massive pull from the US market last year. And that's how, that's what helped us to grow as well, because you suddenly could serve customers all over the world, being remote, and you don't need to have meetings, face-to-face meetings. And actually, you are now able to close six-figure contracts completely remotely.
Yeah.
So that growth was driven from being able to actually service clients in a different continent, by purely having a great product and then understanding that market.
So very interesting that and I know that you're now covering sort of London. You've got presence in the US and a small presence in Asia as well. So from a London-centric business to then growing out a US office during a pandemic, tell me about some of the challenges of that and how you've managed that and been able to do it well.
Well, I think the biggest challenge in a remote world, and also not being able to be in that place physically, is, I think, growing teams and hiring talent. Because I think not meeting people you're hiring can be challenging, and the hiring process needs to change. The hiring process needs to have more emphasis on references, more emphasis on the culture fit, because you can't meet a person in person.
Yeah. And I think that sort of becomes a sort of challenge. So tell me how you've managed that. So you've changed your process. You've got feet on the ground now in the US as well, haven't you?
Yeah. So we have currently 4 people. We're still hiring there.
And they remain remote out there, do they, or?
They are, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And do you see that as being a centralized office at any sort of stage, or is that to be maintained as a sort of remote location geography for you moving further forward?
Well, we do plan to have physical office there as well. We actually do have an office, kind of a space in New York.
Yeah.
But we're hiring around clusters, so we wouldn't hire just people from every state. We're trying to hire around clusters. So there's one around in North Carolina, where it's a second financial center with incredibly talented people.
Yeah.
And perfect for us because it's not New York prices.
Exactly right.
New York prices, but incredibly great people.
We're seeing more and more of that as well. I think it's a really, it's another one of the opportunities from the negative that we've seen over the last year has been people's innovation in what talent looks like and where it can come from as well, which has been really encouraging. Talk to me about that aspect of culture, because in a growing business, and how big are you now, Evgeny?
We're just over 50 people now.
So 50 people. So it's a really interesting sort of phase of growth there, isn't it? Where it starts to to move into a slightly different personality, in your building management teams underneath it, and that connectivity I find really fascinating. It's a really interesting challenge as a leader, as a business owner. It's something there which you're doing things which have rarely been done at that sort of scale before in history. It's a completely different way of motivating, engaging, and keeping your teams moving. What's been successful for you guys over that sort of period to not only be able to survive through that sort of period, but to actually come out thriving from it? What are some of the things that you guys have done to build that culture as the team's grown, as the business has grown, and as with that fragmentation and people now all over the world?
Well, one thing I think, which what I've noticed last year is as we started working remotely, the productivity has gone up incredibly, because people are suddenly going through a lot more because there are less meetings, less distractions, and things are moving faster purely because it's much easier to set up meetings. You can get to senior people at various organizations much quicker and set up meetings with them much quicker than before. So I think the productivity went up, but one thing that was probably overlooked initially is the Zoom fatigue and the just pure productivity based activity, meaning that people are working, but actually there is no break in between. And that can lead to a lot of different consequences. And what I also noticed last year is that a lot of miscommunication comes from not having clear goals and objectives and roles and responsibilities in the company, especially in a smaller company which is growing, where everyone is doing everything. But at some point, because there is less communication, people don't see each other, people don't know who's working on what. That became incredibly important to actually have more transparency in the company with between departments, between people who's working on what, whose objectives are, what objectives are at each department. And that needed to be codified, and that needed to be written down, that needed to be kind of rolled out. And I found that actually, while every team has got goals, other teams wouldn't necessarily know about them, in a transparent manner. So this is something that we started changing. That has a big effect on culture, because you're trying to become more transparent internally. And then another aspect, we started looking at how do we actually bring people together, even if it's on Zoom, but how do we bring some other types of activities into the company, so people don't just talk about work and don't just meet when there are meetings, but also have some outside interests which are brought in to talk about.
So give me some specifics on that, because I think there's two very interesting parts there that you've spoken about. That there's when people talk about culture at the moment, it's very much about replacing the social aspect of team socials and drinks after work and all this sort of thing. And obviously people have done their best to sort of engage that with all sorts of, I've heard literally all sorts, from beach parties to book clubs to anything and everything that's allowed people to get together. And I think it's a very personalized thing, isn't it? Because some people might enjoy that and need that outreach. Other people absolutely despise the concept of having been on screen all day and then doing more of it by their evenings or what have you. So I think it's an interesting balancing act. But the bit that I'm really interested in there is where you said, look, and I think this is a very important aspect about what culture really is in an organization, because whilst the social side of it is without question your business culture, so too are the ethics and the performance and the engagement of giving people interesting things to do, making sure they're working efficiently with each other, being successful at what they're doing in different times, having that security around what they're doing. And when you talk about transparency, clear responsibilities, role clarity, task clarity, these becoming incredibly important to building high performing cultures, as far as I can see as well. That's obviously something you put some thought into and work well to be able to maintain that culture as it's grown in a disconnected manner with, I imagine, large parts of your business who've never even met each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been highlighted by people going remote, because obviously fun is actually one of our values, and fun has always been a big part of the company, but not the main part.
Yeah.
And socials, I don't think they are the only thing that underline the culture. But going into pandemic and going completely remote started to underline pretty much issues that you wouldn't see, or for example, you would just ignore, because everything gets amplified when people are working remotely, don't see each other for a long time. And I think, everyone can have different thought patterns when they're at home and not interacting with anyone. So
Yeah.
that clarity, accountability, responsibility, all of that actually brings kind of framework within which people work in the company. And then, people understand what is expected of them. People understand, where to go if they have problems, and then in that way you can see how the company is performing. But what I found as well is that while we think about motivation in the aspect of remuneration and how well a person feels within the company, I think a big aspect of motivation is seeing clearly that you have goals and you're achieving them.
Yeah.
Because without it's very hard to continue being motivated. And that's a big part of what we're kind of trying to bring more and more into the company, the fact that people feel that they're doing something that gives them the view that they're moving forward.
I think that is something I'm extraordinarily passionate about, because there's whenever you see Great Place to Work reports and you look at companies within that, there's a lot of propaganda that gets put into that. But if you've got a company where it's got lots of beanbags and some great socials, etc., but no one's actually feeling like they're progressing or doing well with their job or winning, that to me is always something there which is going to leave scars for people. And I think businesses that really say, right, how can we make sure that people are contributing to something and doing something well, that's they're the ones whose cultures actually are thriving through this sort of opportunity as well. I find that whole thing fascinating. I could talk about that for hours on end on its own, but I also want to talk about your marketplace and your customers. So you've spoken there about making sure that you moved your sales and marketing to basically be focused on the customer, which I think is absolutely the right thing to do. You're looking there at the challenges, their challenges, and some of the things that they've got to be worried about within it, and you're providing solutions to it. Tell me some of those challenges that your customers have seen over the last 12 months and some of the things you've done to really help out.
Well, the challenges, I guess, to talk about compliance. The challenges in compliance have always been, do we track all of the regulations which are applicable to us and all the changes? Do we implement them properly into our organization if they're applicable to us? And then do our employees actually follow that? Over the last 12 months, we've seen that there is, before you could kind of work together in the office and at least you would know what is the process of doing something, like, for example, client onboarding, the onboarding AML KYC department, which is onboarding clients and checking their identity and everything about their clients. If someone doesn't know what's expected of them, they can just turn around and ask that person. Now you don't have that luxury, and a lot of communication broke down, and regulators actually started seeing that this might be a problem. How do you know that this person who is a trader in a bank now working from home is not using inside information to make trades, for example?
Huge challenge.
It's a huge issue, and this was a big issue. And my conviction is that you cannot fix it by just a system which will monitor people and which will provide some restrictions on what they're able to do. I think the only way to fix that kind of wrongdoing is actually a cultural way to fix it. And a cultural way to fix it is, how do you actually start changing behavior of people towards kind of doing the right thing and understanding what the regulations are and obligations are, and what to do in a particular instance when you're not sure. Of course, there will be bad actors, but bad actors, no restrictions will stop bad actors. But if the culture of financial institutions will start changing towards, well, we are doing the right thing, and you can affect the behavior of people in the compliance world by bringing the right information at the right time to the employees using technology.
Yeah, and that's been one of the great sort of opportunities of this sort of time. I'm interested about that. This has been a year of significant growth, potentially fueled by the move to remote and the challenges you've just spoken about. How do you maintain that sort of growth? With over the next 6 months, people moving back into a more regulated and regular way of doing work, and what the challenges that you see coming up for people, and how do you help with that?
Well, I would say the cat is out of the bag. That the problem is not going to go away when people come back to work. And I think the digital transformation is going to be driven in pretty much any sector, any industry. Despite things going back to normal and people coming back to work, I think we all realize that technology can and does help if implemented properly. And from our perspective, we just looked at the market, and we looked at the trends on the market as well in terms of regulation and compliance. And our worldview is that regulation will just continue to increase, and this is purely because the complexity of the world, the interactions, and what technology brings. Technology doesn't just bring simplicity; it brings complexity as well.
Very much so.
Regulations will increase. Like, for example, when we look at big tech and AI applications, AI is being talked about that it will be regulated purely because at some point we'll cross the threshold of what's possible with AI applications, and we'll need to start thinking about how do we apply it in a safe way, and that will bring regulatory oversight. Autonomous vehicles is another huge area. Come and checked, we'll have autonomous cars making all sorts of decisions. So there will likely be oversight of that as well. Data privacy is a huge topic now. Cybersecurity, huge topic. These are all, until 2018, we didn't have any regulation or any kind of global regulation on data privacy. Suddenly, everyone is subject to it. We see pop-ups and cookies, cookie pop-ups everywhere. And it brings a huge burden on not just, we work in financial services, but this brings huge burden on every company in the world which holds data. So with that trend continuing, we think that it's not long for when pretty much every company will need to have a compliance officer or a compliance function or an outsourced compliance function to actually help them with compliance.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting aspect, and I really like the idea of what you're saying. That I think there's various companies there who are saying this is what we're pushing as an agenda. But what you're talking about there, if I'm not mistaken, is being sort of very agile to the market and the opportunities, and how you can put your customers at the heart of what you're doing, and say, look, let's map their problems as they continue to evolve, and make sure we're there to help use technology and drive technology to provide real world solutions that give them an advantage. And I think that's at its very core. And when I was looking at the listing of the most influential companies, one of the most common things that I was seeing is these are companies who are actually there to be customer led and provide solutions that are going to really help them drive further forward. And that seems to be very completely at the heart of what you've just been talking about. Tell me, with that in mind, there's obviously plans for the business as well, and there's plans for the next 12 months. What does 2021 look like for ClauseMatch?
Well, 2021 is our main focus this year is growing our US presence. It's a huge market, and we see a lot of potential in that market. We will be raising our next round of financing this year as well.
You're doing that. That's what Series B is it now that you're looking to do? Yeah. And you looking, and how are you looking to do that? Who's interesting for you to partner with on that sort of front?
Well, we're on the venture capital journey, so we are speaking to venture capital funds here in Europe and in the US as well.
Yeah,
to help us fuel that growth.
fantastic. And there's massive opportunities within that as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think especially at Series B, it becomes a very attractive story when you are a company which has seen a massive pull into the North American market.
Absolutely.
And where you're not actually pushing your product, but your product is being pulled into the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the growth story as well has been phenomenal. So it has been an interesting year, but I think this year will be another great year for us.
Absolutely. I've got no doubt to doubt that from everything you've been talking about so far. And I think it's really interesting. I've been speaking to a lot of companies over recent months who've been through that Series B journey of late, Series B and C in particular. And I think there's obviously been some pressure on that, but at the same sort of time, in my view, there's a huge pent up demand of a lot of money out there waiting to be invested and to be put into the right things. So my experience of that and what I've seen from it so far is that there is definitely money to be being put into exciting businesses, and some of the things you've just spoken about there are absolutely what they're looking to go with. The big thing I've just seen is it's sometimes taking a little bit more due diligence, a little bit more time, and a little bit more work to make sure those decks are absolutely on point with where people want to go. So there'll be some fun to be had with that. I'm sure you're looking forward to that aspect too. Listen, Evgeny, it's time has flown incredibly quickly through all of that, and I feel like I could be talking for a long time more about your journey and finding out a little bit more about everything that's been happening with the business. And I do love, as I say, hearing as many stories as I've had of businesses who have really taken the bull by the horns with everything that's been going on, and not only just got through the last year, but absolutely thrive with it as well. So I pass on my huge congratulations to you and what sounds like a fantastic team, and very, very best of luck to you for that US growth. I think it's a marketplace that I'm tremendously excited about, and we'll be doing the same thing with our US business over the course of the next year. So very excited to see what happens over there in a place where I think there will be a significant bounce as well. So good luck with that. And thank you so much for joining us on the show and sharing your wisdom and insight, and so many different things there that we can take away, and I'm sure it's going to be useful for everyone who's been hearing as well. Evgeny, for people who've listened to what you've been talking about and liking the sound of ClauseMatch and saying, you know what, I'm experiencing some of those problems myself from a compliance area, or other people who want to say, look, I want to find out a little bit more about how you've navigated the last year or so, what's the best way of them getting in touch with you?
I mean, our website is closematch.com. You can find me on LinkedIn as well, Evgeny Likhoded. I'm there.
Fantastic.
Any questions? And Toby, thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Absolute pleasure, and it's been great to hear it. I love, as I say, I love hearing those stories. So please do reach out to Evgeny and the team. We'll put some tags in when we push this out on social media as well. So I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interest from what you've been doing. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on the show, and thank you all for watching. We will see you very shortly on another episode of Fintech Focus TV. Thanks a lot.